Okay, good morning, and thank you for your patience in me getting started. I've been teaching graduate students from my dining room for 2.5 years, and so I'm a little shell-shocked to be in front of three-dimensional people. I started teaching in person last week, and I was saying earlier I had to figure out how to not trip over wires and where to stand and all that sort of thing. So thank you, first of all, to Amy Mamelow and to the Math Head Forum for the invitation to come and talk to you this morning. My presentation is shorter than Dr. Mighton's, but I hope that the information that I am sharing with you is useful and interesting. I actually wanted to take a minute to talk about my connection to Dr. Mighton and to Jump Math. I'm sorry, I'm just sizing my window a little so I can see my notes here. Are you? Maybe there's volume. Okay, I'll try. I was saying that I am a developmental psychologist by training, so I'm a research scientist. I don't actually have a pedagogical background, at least not at the elementary school level. I have been working with Dr. Mighton and with John Math. I was trying to figure it out, John, I think since about 2007, 2008. So that's about 15 years. My research interest is in math learning and teaching, and I'm particularly interested in making research findings accessible to the end user, to teachers who are dealing with students directly, because there actually aren't a lot of mechanisms for making that happen. So as the research is evolving in the cognitive sciences and the neurosciences, researches outside of the faculties of education, that's often where they're going on, we actually don't have a lot of mechanisms for getting that research to teachers or for making it accessible and comprehensible to them. I was first drawn to Jump. Sorry, my window is moving, not for you, but for me. Let's see if I can read all my. That's better. Okay, so I was actually drawn to Jump, first of all, for its unique approach, but particularly because when I started to really look at the program, I realized that the key features of this really interesting approach were actually really well supported by the cognitive science literature. And personally, I couldn't believe my good fortune that in interacting with Dr. Mighton and also with the Jump organization, how incredibly open they were to research and to being evaluated, and their willingness to take the lessons that we can get from the research and help to refine the program and make it even more effective. As a researcher, I can tell you that it's not very easy to go to curriculum developers or to publishers and have them say, sure, yeah, come on in, evaluate it. Tell me if my program is effective, yes or no. So over the years, I have been able to work with Dr. Mighton and with Jump Math in a number of different ways. You saw earlier a slide from one of the studies that I have done actually evaluating the impact of Jump Math, which we were able to publish. Dr. Mighton and I actually teach an undergraduate course. So we developed a course on effective math learning and teaching, where I teach the students more about what the research has to say about what's conducive to good uptake of math information, and Dr. Mighton follows by providing the pedagogical input. And more recently, I have been very lucky to work on an exciting project with Dr. Mighton and with Jump Math, which is really looking at developing a coherent preschool math-focused supplement to help put all children onto a stronger footing in math at the start of formal schooling. So that's more of what I'm going to tell you about today. Very quickly, in terms of background, Dr. Mighton touched on some of these points, but part of our motivation definitely in wanting to develop preschool mathematics-focused materials comes from the fact that I think it's quite clear now from the literature that mathematics is really an important, if not critical, skill in the 21st century. We see that people's math skills, really measured at any age, it predicts a number of what I call quality of life indices. So people with better math skills tend to be able to make more informed decisions in regards to their health and their finances. Of course, won't be surprised to hear that better math skills means access to a growing sector of employment, which is the STEM sector. STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So, greater job opportunities, chances also of a greater income compared to jobs in the non-STEM sector. And some findings that I found actually quite intriguing. There are some data from the United Kingdom that show that math skills are actually also related to instances of criminality. So cautions and suspensions and arrests. So it seems like without having at least even rudimentary mathematical skills, that can have consequences that are farther reaching than just doing well in school, at least initially. The research has also been very clear for some time now. Another point that Dr. Mighton touched on, that preschool children's math skills, first of all, they vary widely. So you see huge differences across children at the start of kindergarten when they're coming into formal schooling in terms of their preparation in mathematics. We know that preschool children's pre-kindergarten math skills predict academic achievements, so definitely at the end of elementary school, another slide that Dr. Mighton showed you. And he also pointed out that not only do those early math skills predict our later math achievement, but they predict our later reading achievement. So that's a pretty intriguing finding, as he already pointed out. And I read a couple of studies very recently that are also showing that there's actually a bidirectional influence between really good, effective mathematical input and the development of executive function skills. So those are things like our working memory, our cognitive flexibility, those kinds of things, and attention and so forth. I thought that was really interesting because we've typically treated executive function as a predictor of math achievement, but it turns out if you get really good math input, that can actually nudge the development of your executive function skills along. And that could be why we're seeing the results that we see in reading, because with better executive function, we can see consequences across the board academically. In particular, the research has also told us and made very clear that children from under-resourced communities and households tend to lag their better resource peers in their rudimentary math skills. And we see that gap as early as 3 years of age. So already at 3 years of age, well before children are coming into kindergarten, there is a big gap in achievement that is related to socioeconomic status. So not only do these findings, not only does difficulty with math have consequences early on in elementary school, but it tends to put you on a path where, unless your gaps in your knowledge or your struggles with math are addressed, you're probably going to continue to stay on that path, which means you're going to have more struggles and more limitations as time goes on. So we know, for example, that students who struggle with math, that's related to the math courses that they take in high school. It's related to lower rates of high school graduation and college entry. It's related to college graduation and eventually to career earnings and also to earnings growth. So I think it's very clear that it's critical to get children onto a positive developmental trajectory. And furthermore, our efforts really need to be focused very early on. Like I said, once children get onto a path, unless there's a sufficient change in the input that they're receiving, they're likely to stay on that path, and therefore the gaps in their knowledge will only grow and their struggles in mathematics will continue to grow. And this point, I think, is particularly important because, at least to our knowledge, in Canada, we don't actually have any coherent preschool math-focused curricula. That's not to say that in early childcare settings, students aren't getting mathematical input, but it's very diverse, and there are lots of students who attend childcare settings where they don't get much in the way of mathematical input. So in terms of existing curricula, some of the sources that I consulted in the program that I'm about to tell you about that we're working on were mostly American. There is a need here in Canada for something coherent at the preschool level. So let me get to the preschool materials that we're working on. For the moment, I'm going to refer to it as the Jump Math Preschool Supplement. I don't know if we took a vote yet, Ken and John, if that's where we're going to land. But first thing to say is that this represents a really fantastic partnership and opportunity. I am on faculty at OISE, and of course, Dr. Mighton is at Jump Math, and together we are also partnering with the YMCA of Canada. That's a huge, fortunate situation for us. We're working there with Lori Huggins, who is the General Manager of Training and Research and Program Development. The Y is the largest nonprofit childcare provider in Canada, with over 1,200 licensed childcare centers and about 990 early childhood educators or early childcare staff. The Y currently has its own preschool curriculum, which is not just math focused, but a coherent overall early childcare curriculum called Playing to Learn. And that curriculum reaches about 30,000 students annually. So not all of those students are in the age range that we're targeting, but a good chunk of the students that we're targeting in developing this tool definitely are part of that group. Okay, so what does this do? Among other things, it gives us critical input about implementing some of the activities and the resources that we're developing, about the practicalities of putting those things into play. It's helping to refine those ideas, but it will also give us an amazing opportunity to disseminate this tool once it's fully developed and available. So what does it look like? Well, the preschool supplement is made up of 11 learning modules. The first two of those modules are really focused at sort of raising awareness and getting across the importance of early intervention with preschool educators. And the remaining modules, for the moment, this is a draft of what they would look like in the final version. The remaining modules are targeting specific mathematical concepts that the research has shown us are really important for children to have when they go into kindergarten so that they can really profit from the kindergarten curriculum. I want to outline just sort of the key features of the supplement to give you a sense for what's novel about it and why it might be so potentially powerful. So of course, it's based on the same pedagogical principles that Dr. Mighton mentioned in his talk earlier. Those are integrated really well into the program. We're targeting children in the year before they enter kindergarten in the hopes of boosting or giving them kind of an extra shot in the arm, if you will, in bringing their math skills and knowledge up to speed so that they can really profit from that kindergarten curriculum. But a lot of these activities have been developed in such a way that they would be accessible even to children as young as 2 years of age. So each of our modules includes research on the development of that target concept that the module is all about, or skill, and then a progression of activities that teachers can use to help support children's learning of that target concept or skill. We show teachers how to scaffold each activity so they can adapt the activities for children who are not yet successful. And we also show them a number of ways that they can extend those activities for children who are progressing well. So I wanted to actually make a point here regarding the question about higher performing students. In our research, where we've investigated the impact of Jump Math, we actually find gains across the board. So we don't see that it's just the struggling students who are having their gaps filled in, and that's what's driving the difference in means or the progress that we're seeing. In fact, we see a shift in the entire distribution, suggesting that there's enough in Jump to adapt to even those higher performing students and provide them with enough challenges. The teacher training is being delivered through an online learning platform that is going to allow teachers to complete that learning at their own pace. And we definitely give them guidance on how to implement the activity. So how long should they be working with them, which is going to be mostly I think, guided by when children reach a sufficient level of mastery, as opposed to this is how many days or this is how many weeks you want to work with this material. Okay. All right. Another, I think, important thing that I want to address here in regards to what's novel about this. We're aiming for something here in this preschool supplement that is both evidence informed, so tightly aligned to what the research is telling us ought to be effective for significant gains in math understanding in very young children. But at the same time, we want a product eventually that is evidence-based. In other words, we want something for which we have data to say this is having the impact on the outcomes that we are interested in influencing here. So it's evidence informed in a number of ways. One of them is that the mathematical concepts and the corresponding activities in these modules were selected and developed based on the most recent research available of how children acquire those concepts. So there is a tight alignment between what's contained and how it's ordered and how these activities look and what the research is telling us ought to be effective for math learning. Even the selection of materials, when we make suggestions to teachers about the kinds of materials that they can use in the activities, that's very much guided by, for example, the research on the effective use of manipulatives in the classroom. We also took the research into account just in the development of this supplement more generally. So I read a really interesting paper by researchers who have done a lot of evaluation or effectiveness or efficacy type studies. And they published a really helpful paper that sort of charted their journey and laid out some of the challenges that they came across in doing this kind of research or developing these kinds of products. And among other things, they talked about what are some of the barriers to uptake. So even when you do a rigorous study that shows that this new resource or something is actually getting you or making gains on the outcomes that you're interested in, what are the kinds of things that educators tell us are kind of barriers to being able to take that up at a larger scale, or for teachers to take that up at all? And one of the things that they identified that really struck with me is if teachers have the perception that this new thing represents a mindset shift, like I'm going to put away what I've been doing and I have to take on a whole new thing, that becomes really onerous and that can be off-putting for them. So with that in mind, we rather than go with a coherent math curriculum, put everything away that you've been doing and do this now, we focus instead on developing something that's supplemental. So the idea is that all of these activities can be infused into the daily preschool routine. So whatever overall preschool curriculum you're working with, or even if you don't have a coherent one, you can integrate these activities and therefore give children practice working with these concepts. We also are preparing a teacher resource that will give teachers detailed guidance about how to implement these activities and how to scaffold and extend them. And part of the reason that we're doing that is we know that even after people are highly engaged in training, once they leave, a lot of that material is lost from memory. So instead, when they're in the training, they can really focus on understanding the concept, the progression in the activities, knowing that there's a resource that they can refer to later on when the time comes to actually do that implementation. And as I said, we're also very much interested eventually in having an evidence-based product. So we will absolutely have a systematic evaluation so we can get some data that speaks to just how effective is the supplement for improving children's math skills in this critical period. So very quickly, I've got a few minutes left. I wanted to give you a small flavor for the way that we're developing this product and critically for the genius of Dr. Mighton's ability to translate these research findings and turn them into activities. So one topic that one of our earliest modules is focusing on is something called Subitizing. And that module is focused on Subitizing, and also then we connect that ability to counting. So Subitizing refers to our ability to know by looking, without invoking any counting skills, how many items there are in a set. And we are actually limited in our ability to do that. So adults can easily subitize up to 5 items. So if you look at the set of dots there under the green check mark, you can look at that, and even if it's in a really wacky arrangement, you would know pretty quickly that there are 5 items there without counting them. But once the number gets larger, so look at the set under the X over there, it becomes more difficult to do that by looking. You'd actually have to start using your counting skills. And for young children, especially in the preschool range, Our subitizing ability is limited to just 3 items, and once you get past those 3 items, children would have to start using their counting skills. So why are we focusing on subitizing before we even get to counting? That would seem like, maybe counting might seem like a natural starting point for developing number sense. Well, for one thing, it's well established in the research that subitizing is a really important precursor to counting. But in consulting existing materials, we actually find that not a lot of time is given to subitization with young children. A little bit, and then it tends to lead right into counting right away. Well, our first content module actually focuses entirely on subitizing and really making children explicitly aware of their capacity to do this. After practicing many of the subitizing activities in that module, we then introduce activities towards the end of it that show children explicitly how you can look at it and know how many are there. And then when you have some counting skills, you can count to confirm that that number is actually correct. So in that module, we first give the educators a little bit of background. So for example, we'll tell them about research that shows that babies as young as 4 to 5 months of age have the capacity to subitize very small sets of items, so up to 3 items. That usually gets a little bit of a shock response when I say that. So maybe it's Saturday morning and you're still in your zone or whatever, but babies 4 to 5 months of age can subitize small sets of items up to 3 items. Here's an example of an early activity, early in the progression of subitizing activities in this particular module. So we first tell teachers what they will need. So this will all be in the teacher resource. So in this activity, you need dot cards. We also show teachers how they can create them. So cards that have 1 to 3 dots on them. You need some set of countable items. Bingo chips are typically a good thing to use. You want to use things that are the same, a little bit boring, so there's no extraneous perceptual information there that's going to pull children's attention away from what it is we really want them to focus on. And then you need some trays. You could use a small whiteboard, you could use a paper plate, you could use any substitute for these trays. And then we give teachers instructions on the steps that are required in order to implement this activity. So the first step is that you would show a child a card with 1, 2, or 3 dots on it. Then you point to the dot card and then the tray and the chips, and you ask them, can you put this many chips on the tray? So notice you don't actually have to do any counting. You're just matching the number of items you can subitize on that card, and you want to make the tray display look the same. So when you look at the display on the tray, you get the same value as when you look at the card. And then we give teachers information about, if children are struggling, we give them information about how to give feedback to the children. So if they're not quite getting it right, they have too few bingo chips on the tray, or they have too many, how do we respond to that? And we also show them, as I said, how they can adapt the activity. So students who are struggling even with this task that might seem very simple to us, but could be quite challenging for very young children. One recommendation might be to begin by using only 1 or 2 dots. You could even place the dot card face up and then have children put the counters on the dot so they correspond directly on that card. And as I say, we also give give the teachers ideas for how they can extend this activity. So one way is that you can use 2 trays. The teacher says, this is your tray, this is my tray. And then you put 1, 2, or 3 counters on the tray and say, can you make your tray the same? And you can even take turns. You can have the child put a number of counters on the tray, and then the teacher could have a turn at making a matching display. So there are many activities on subitizing. This is just one that's early in the progression, but I wanted to give you some sense for how sort of basic we're going in order to help children really kind of glom on to mathematical ideas and set the stage for counting, which can come later. So we can even adapt this task later on so that at the end, when children have counting skills or they're beginning to count, after looking and making a matching array, they can then count them to confirm that the number on the card and on the tray are the same. Another thing that's unique to the supplement is that We also have material in the supplement that focuses on concepts or abilities that the research is telling us children need to know before they go into kindergarten that don't come necessarily from curricula or from educational type studies, but rather these are tasks or abilities that the neurosciences or the cognitive sciences have helped us to realize are actually really important for doing well in mathematics down the road. So one of these is magnitude comparison. There is a non-symbolic version of magnitude comparison. So here, people have to look at this display over here and say which side of that rectangle has more dots on it or has a greater magnitude of dots. And then in the symbolic version, they look at two Arabic numerals and they have to make judgments about which of those is larger in magnitude. Well, it turns out that we get more accurate with that. At doing this with development, we also get faster at making these distinctions. But if you give children the opportunity, or if you assess their ability to make these distinctions early on, that's actually a quite robust predictor of their mathematics achievement concurrently and also some years down the road. So we have a module in which we have lots of activities devoted to helping children to learn to make these distinctions and to become more comfortable, more accurate, and quicker at making them. Another part of that same module has to do with mapping magnitudes onto Arabic symbols. So in order to get to formal mathematics and be able to work with those number symbols, we really need automatically to understand that when you see an Arabic numeral, you could express that with a set of items. And when you see a set of items, you could express that or capture that information that could be represented by an Arabic numeral. We know that children as young as grade 1 are very efficient at making these mappings in both directions, but we also know that there is a lot of progress in terms of accuracy and speed of being able to do this. So by the time you get to grade 3, you're even better at this. And furthermore, we know that being able to do this accurately and relatively quickly predicts performance in grade 1, both on timed and untimed math assessments, and in grade 3 on untimed math assessments. So here's another critical skill, this and magnitude comparison, that comes out of the neuroscience literature, but we realize that it's really important for even preschoolers to be able to think about, to be familiar with and to be able to make those kinds of mappings. So quickly, I just want to say some things about the potential impact as I see it for the supplement that we're developing. Well, definitely one of our hopes and why we start out with a more general presentation in the first module in this series is to help raise early childhood educator awareness about the importance of early math skills. It also gives us the opportunity to dispel some myths that people might have about math learning that could really influence the way you go about teaching or responding to struggling students. Things like dispelling the myth that gender has any role to play in our expectations of who can and can't learn math or how far we can go with mathematics. There is no data to support the idea that there are any gender-related differences in capacity for mathematics processing or learning. Another myth that Dr. Mighton touched on earlier has to do with the pervasive belief that some people are just really good at math and other people not as much. And you can see how if you held that belief, that would influence certainly the way that you taught in the first place, but also, and I think critically, the way that you respond to struggling students. And by the way, there's data that speaks to that even at the post-secondary level. So professors who have more of this mindset that some people are good at math and others are not, may be more likely to comfort struggling students, to direct them towards their strengths and away from the material that's challenging them. And in effect, taking away those opportunities to practice, and to really go at trying to understand that material. We, of course, also want to empower educators here to support the development of these critical skills by giving them training and resources, along with these developmentally appropriate implementation-ready activities that they could easily integrate into their daily routine. And just so that you don't come away from this thinking that this is a very prescriptive supplement, you do this, then you do this, then you do this. We also provide teachers with good examples after they've seen some of the activities, with examples of how they can capitalize on their students' interests and develop some of these activities for themselves, or how they could adapt these activities once they have some mastery of how these things are supposed to go. Of course, we definitely critically want to be filling in gaps in young children's math skills and knowledge, and in effect kind of even the playing field for those children in preparation for kindergarten. We want to put them in a position where the kindergarten curriculum has something to glom onto, so they can really benefit from it when they get there. And that, of course, is especially important for children from under-resourced communities who tend to lag their peers already, as I said, as early as 3 years of age, from better resourced communities. And in terms of expected reach, I think, again, I can't emphasize enough how lucky we are to be working with the YMCA for a number of reasons, but certainly key amongst that is our ability through them to be able to disseminate the Jump Math Preschool Supplement throughout their network. And we've talked a little bit with them about the possibility also of that eventually being open up so that any early childhood educators who are interested can take these training modules and can have access to the resources and implement those activities in their classrooms. And I want to leave with the final point, which I actually think Dr. Mighton is best at making and makes me similarly emotional, which is that I think our longer term aim here is for a more equitable classroom initially, and preparing children for a more equitable classroom, but ultimately for a more equitable society with the skills and the knowledge, with people having the skills and knowledge to make sense of quantitative information. Think of all the quantitative data that came out in COVID-19. Think of what we know about climate. Think about what we know about poverty and the impact on early development and so forth. So a more equitable society in that people are better equipped to make sense of quantitative data and consequently to be able to enjoy the benefits and the opportunities that that will eventually afford. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tracy.